just want to begin with a question, and that question is God unfair? Is God unjust? I had a conversation with a friend of mine last night who shared with me that once again his wife miscarried. Once again. And this young man, he loves the Lord. He serves as a pastor in a church, loves his wife, loves his one child, and has been trying to build his family. And they're now wrestling once again with the why. And I know this is not a unique story. Is God unfair? Is God unjust? The Bible seems to say that God is both fair and just. I've always thought the better question to ask is, am I in a position to judge God's ways? Or another way to say it is, do I know better than God? And of course, the unequivocal answer to that question is no. Of course I don't know better than God. But the natural man in us, at times, thinks we know better. We think we know how God should act according to our understanding of the world and its ways. What's right and what's wrong. And this happens due to our sinful nature. It happens because we have sinful hearts, and at our most self-absorbed times, we forget that God is the author of right and wrong. And there is no one good but God alone. When it comes to the kingdom of heaven, what we need to do is think differently. We need to think differently. And as we come to this parable today, Jesus is teaching his disciples exactly that they need to think differently about merit and reward. In chapter 19, Jesus has just said that while it's difficult for a rich person to enter the kingdom, anything is possible with God. That is, God can make the impossible possible. Those things are normal for him. And Peter replies this, he says this to Jesus, "We have left everything to follow you. What then will we have? What will we have for what we've given you?" That's Peter's question. It's a question that's asking about payment received for services rendered. He's thinking transactionally. What do we get for following you? What are we going to receive? What is there for us who've given up everything? And Jesus tells them about the authority that they'll receive in the new world. Then he says, "But many who are first will be last and the last first," which is a comment about the upside down thinking needed to understand the kingdom of heaven. A mirror statement of the one that was read at the end of our passage, chapter 20, verse 16. And I guess I'm saying to you that most of these kingdom of heaven verses, these parables, they are there to correct our thinking. They are talking about the way of life according to God and not of this world. And he just tells story after story after story to help us think differently about what life should be like as those of us who are finding themselves in the kingdom. They're there to rewire our minds, to think like God, or at least to see what God's thinking and then act accordingly. This one's no different. Peter has opened the proverbial can of merit worms. Shouldn't I receive from God according to what I've done? That's his question. Let's take a look at how this plays out in chapter 20. Verse 1. "For the kingdom of heaven," Jesus says, "is like a master of a house who went out early in the morning to hire laborers for his vineyard. And the for at the start of that sentence is pointing back to chapter 19. We've already discussed that. What is the for therefore is a good thing to just keep in your head as you read the Bible. When you come to that word, just think, well, what is that for therefore? And then read what happened beforehand. That's for free. I'll give you that for free. Here's the scenario. A master of a house has a vineyard, it's likely a large vineyard, and it's time for harvest of the grapes. Whatever bond servants he has in his house, it's not enough to do the work. So he goes to the place where the workmen are waiting, looking for a day's labor. These are the ones who aren't bonded laborers to a household. These are the ones very reliant on somebody else coming to find them and saying, hey, come work for me today. And it's at sunrise that the master's out there. And verse 2 says, after agreeing with the laborers for a denarius a day, he sent them into his vineyard. So he goes, he finds laborers, he hires them for a denarius a day, and then sends them into his vineyards. He makes a contractual agreement with them to pay them a certain amount for a day's labor. Standard payment for a standard day's labor, usually from sunrise to sundown, the workday, and they'd get paid at the end of the day. I don't know, maybe the work wasn't going fast enough. Maybe the master of the house wanted the entire harvest done on that day, which is not uncommon because grapes, when they hit ripeness, need to be harvested fast. Maybe the master went to the marketplace for a totally unrelated reason another 4 times that day. We're not told. But when he's there, well, let's read what happens. Verse 3, it says, and going out about the 3rd hour, he saw others standing idle in the marketplace. And he said to them, you go into the vineyard too, and whatever is right I will give you. So they went, going out again about the 6th hour, can't get enough of the marketplace, and the 9th hour, there again, he did the same. And about the 11th hour, he went out and found others standing. And he said to them, why do you stand here idle all day? They said to him, because no one has hired us. He said to them, you go into the vineyard too. Look at verse 3. It says that he saw others standing idle. It doesn't say that he went to hire more workers. It said that he saw them standing idle, and so he hired them. There was no agreed wage. They went understanding that the master would give them what was right. And knowing that a denarius is a day's wage for a day's labor, they would have expected, well, I'm not going to get that because I'm not starting at sunrise and working till sundown. I've come later, and so forth for the next hour and the next hour. He does the same around midday, same around 3 p.m., then returned even later and just found laborers standing around. And he's a bit skeptical. Why are these laborers standing around? Has no one else hired them? What's the deal here? So he asked them a question. Why are you here? And the workers reply, because no one has hired us yet. No one has hired us. Which is, a little bit odd when you think about it, considering how many times the master has gone to the market. Has he not seen these guys? Maybe they had already worked somewhere in the morning and they've come back to the marketplace to find more work for the afternoon because got to make ends meet. Petrol prices peaking out at going over $3 a litre. None of the men had timesheets, to clock in or clock out of their job. But they had a common understanding that a day's labour was worth a denarius, which is around, let's say, roughly $100 Australian. Those who came later in the day would expect to be paid less than that. So far, so good. Right? Normal activity. But this is a parable about the kingdom of heaven and what it's like. So let's see how this turns out. Verse 8 says this. And when evening came, the owner of the vineyard said to his foreman, call the labourers and pay them their wages, beginning with the last up to the first. 2 things to say here. First is that the owner would have directed the foreman how much to pay each person. The foreman isn't just going rogue and doing what he wants. Okay, second thing, the master has decided to pay the last first and the first last. What does that mean? What that means is that the master wanted those who came at the beginning of the day to witness what those who came later in the day received. Typically, you would pay the people who came early because they've done the most work so they can just take their money and go, like get home quickly. That'd be a polite thing to do. But the master wants the other laborers to know. It's an intentional part of Jesus' storytelling. How will they react? Verse 9 says this. And when those hired about the 11th hour came, each of them received a denarius, a full day's wage. This is huge, huge money. The master has just paid these laborers who worked for like a couple of hours max the full day's wage. It's like 10 times what they might have expected. Incredibly generous. Now, the parable doesn't tell us about what the in-betweeners got, but we can assume they got a denarius as well. It just talks about those who came last, got paid first, and then those who came first got paid last. And let's see what happened with them. Verse 10 says, now when those hired first came, they thought they would receive more. But each of them also received a denarius. And on receiving it, they grumbled at the master of the house, saying, these last worked only 1 hour, and you made them equal to us, who have borne the burden of the day and the scorching heat. 10 times the work, same pay. 10 times the work in the scorching heat of the day. Their complaint is that the guys who came last to work worked in the cool afternoon breeze and got paid a full day's wages, and they have been working throughout the hottest part of the day, the scorching sun on their backs as they worked the long hours, and they got paid a denarius too. Is that unfair? Is that unjust? Totally feels that way, doesn't it? We can be honest here. The story's supposed to provoke a reaction. I think most of us would grumble hard if that was us in that situation. I know a number of you work on the tools out in the heat. How would you feel if some guy rocked up to do 4 p.m. to 5 p.m. as the breeze is up and the shade's down, and you've been there since 6 a.m. banging away in the heat? How would you feel if your boss just then went and paid them the same as they paid you for that day? Kind of picture the guy on his knees in platoon with his arms like yelling out, you know what I mean? Why? Like, why? Why would you do that? I think there'd be people in our world that would sue the master of the house if that happened. They'd take him to court. But they would lose. They would lose the case. Look at verse 13. But he, that's the master, replied to one of them, probably the chief grumbler, friend, that's it, his friend. He's okay with this guy, he's just helping him out. Friend, I am doing you no wrong. Did you not agree with me for a denarius? The agreement was made back at the time of hiring. It's the only agreement that was made. With the first that came, Jesus made the agreement that they will work the day and get paid a denarius, and they accepted the work and came along. So if he was taken to court, they would lose. By the law, the master has done nothing wrong. He's holding to the letter of the law. He hasn't been unfair with them. He hasn't been unjust with them. He has chosen to be generous to the others. So he says this, verse 14, take what belongs to you and go. I choose to give to this last worker as I give to you. Am I not allowed to do what I choose with what belongs to me? Or do you begrudge my generosity? So the last will be first and the first last. I choose to give, says the master. It's like the same word. I want to give. It's my will to give. He wants to be generous to the others, says the master. And he follows up with this question: can't I do what I want with what is mine? Are you envious of my generosity? See, it's not an issue about fairness or about justice. It's that the first are envious of the master's grace shown to the last. They're envious of it. It seems like they've got a better deal. But they haven't lost anything. In fact, they have received what was agreed upon, what was promised to them. They were rewarded for their labor. What they are doing is objecting to an act of sheer generosity that the master showed to the others. It's like the older brother in the parable of the prodigal son all over again. The older son refuses to rejoice in the father's generosity and joy in seeing his younger son who was lost come back. You know, have a big party for the younger son, but the older son refuses to rejoice in it, refuses to be a part of the party, thinks it's great injustice done to him. The master in this story, like the father's grace in the prodigal son story, is what is on display. And knowing that we're talking about God here and how he treats people, the grace of God is on display in this parable. God wants to be gracious and generous to those he chooses. And the disciples aren't to be envious of others who come late to the kingdom. That's the teaching point for the disciples. Like Peter, remember what Peter's saying? His question that triggered this is like, we've left everything to follow you. Like, we're the first. We've left everything. What's there for us? They are not to be envious for those who came later. Once you're in the kingdom, whenever you arrive, you are one of God's sons or daughters, one of God's chosen people. And we are not to be envious of God's grace to another. I'm going to let the Apostle Paul weigh in. He says it like this in Galatians chapter 3, verse 28 and 29. He says, "There is neither Jew nor Greek, there is neither slave nor free, there is no male and female, for you are all one in Christ Jesus. And if you are Christ's, then you are Abraham's offspring, heirs according to the promise." So it doesn't matter if you came first or you came last, you are recipients of the promise. In Christ, we are recipients. We are not to be envious of another. We are to rejoice in the graciousness of God. Like, if you are part of the vineyard inside the Father's house, one of God's people, saved by grace through faith, no matter when you got there, then God's grace has been poured out on you. Do you understand what I'm saying? Imagine coming to such a phenomenal riches as being saved by God and being brought into his kingdom, and then being envious of others who came later than you. Is not knowing God and being saved by God and knowing peace with God for longer better than sooner? Or sorry, better than coming later? There is this myth that is out there that I think Christians feel sometimes. It's like, it goes a bit like this: I wish, maybe I could have been saved later in life so I got to experience all of the world stuff. You've heard that, right? You hear that sort of stuff? Like, I'll just get saved on my deathbed because I want to go and live this way. Sometimes I think even Christians think that. They want to experience what the world has to offer as if it's better than knowing God and being with God. Let me give you another quote. This is from Morris. He says, "The natural man assumes that reward is geared to merit. Jesus is pointing out that God does not deal with us on the basis of merit, but of grace. The love of God in all its fullness is poured out on sinners, and they receive infinitely more than they deserve. The parable underlines the truth that God's way is always the way of grace. Do you believe that to be true? God's way is always the way of grace? It is true. God's way is grace because it's an attribute of who He is. And I think back to Exodus, when Israel is at Mount Sinai and Moses asked to see God's glory. God replied to him, Exodus chapter 33, verse 19, I will make all my goodness pass before you and will proclaim before you my name, the Lord. That is Yahweh, that is His personal name. And He says, I will be gracious to whom I will be gracious, and I will show mercy on whom I will show mercy. It's a part of who God is, to show grace and mercy. It's His attributes, to be gracious. And in this parable, we're being told that God is gracious by His own nature, and let's rejoice in that as disciples of Jesus and not be envious of His grace to others. Did you notice that the master went to hire workers in the morning? So he went there to hire them. He had a purpose. Yet in the next visits to the market, he just saw some people, found some people, and so he sent them into his vineyard to work and blessed them with a full day's wage. We're supposed to notice the master's compassion in those moments, because God is merciful and compassionate. I floated this question earlier, right? Shouldn't I get from God according to what I have done? Shouldn't I get from God according to what I've done? It's a sentiment on the lips of a lot of people who consider themselves good. Same people who generally don't want anything to do with God apart from a ticket into heaven. They just want to be blessed for all the choices they've made in life, regardless of God's standards. What people fail to understand is that if God gave us what we deserved for what we have done, it would be death for our sin against Him and eternal torment. Because no one is deserving of God's favor. So thankfully, no, we do not get what we deserve from God. We get so much more. But the only reason we would envy someone else being saved from that outcome, that is death and damnation, is that if we've forgotten that that's what happened to us too. We are those saved from our sin by Christ. But we have come to know that in the grace of the good news of Jesus Christ, God chooses. He wants us. He wants to call people back to Himself and richly bless people by offering them the forgiveness of their sins, both past, present, and future. This is the good news of the gospel. All of us are undeserving of God's mercy, but because He is gracious, He chooses to save some. Let's not be jealous of the when, but rejoice in the fact He saved us and promises to us more than we can possibly imagine. I'm going to pray.